Hello and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the online festival of ideas curated by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? My name is Leo, and in this second session from Cranfield University at this year's DIF, Innovations for Circular Sanitation is the title of this session, and we'll be hearing from experts and academics working around sanitation and the circular economy issues. And they will be discussing what innovations and transformations are needed to unlock the circular economy potential of sanitation services at different contexts and scales in developing countries. In a moment, I'll hand things over to Dr. Dolores Ray, who will be joined in discussion with 4 experts in circular economy, sanitation, and water, and even microbiology. And for those of you watching live, this is a reminder that the DIF is all about interaction. And just below this video stream is a comment section. And do feel free to add any comments or questions that you want to be addressed by any of the speakers today in there. And Dolores will try her utmost to try and get it part of the discussion. And also to remind you that you can post questions on Twitter using the hashtag ThinkDiff. So without any further ado, Dolores, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Leo. Welcome everyone to this session on innovations for circular sanitation. I have here with me Dr. Mariale Moreno, Professor Sean Tyrrell, Dr. Alison Parker, and Dr. Paul Hutchins. And well, the idea of this session is to try to describe and discuss what would be the innovations that are going to be circular economy and sanitation reality. So the structure of this session is followed a gap analysis approach. So we are going to focus our discussion in 3 different questions. First of all, is where we are now regarding circular sanitation in developing countries. Then we are going to talk about where do we want to be in a few years' time, what will be the ideal status, and finally, what would be the innovations that will take us there. But before starting with those 3 questions, we are going to have a brief introduction to the topic. So Mariale is going to describe what is circular economy and what does it mean in the context of sanitation. And then Sean is going to give a brief overview of the current situation of sanitation in the world, focusing on developing countries. And then we will have a discussion and we will answer some questions from the audience. So if you want to start, Mariale, with the description of circular economy and sanitation.
For sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mariale Moreno, and I am an academic fellow here at Cranfield. And I'm working with my colleagues presented here. They are from water, and in this project on innovation for circular sanitation. So what in this context, how we are looking at circular economy is more in the biological cycle rather than in the technical cycle. And what we are looking to is how we can create more value from bio waste, but also to improve people's life in developing countries. So I will pass it now to Sean so he can explain a little bit more about the sanitation context.
Thank you very much, Mariale. Hello, everybody. So my name's Sean Tyrrell. I'm Professor of Bioaerosol Science here at Cranfield University. So I'm an environmental microbiologist, and I've got a particular interest in the relationship between environmental pollution and human health. And of course, sanitation is one of the biggest ways in which the environment gets polluted, or bad sanitation is. So if you go back to the turn of the century, the international community under the auspices of the United Nations set out some Millennium Development Goals, and eventually those Millennium Development Goals took into account sanitation, although sanitation was ignored initially in their development. And as part of that process, a new system was set up for monitoring the state of sanitation globally. Previously, there wasn't good data on how good or how bad the sanitation status of the world was. So back at the end of the 20th century, those systems started to be put in place, and now we know how well we're doing, and we know what the trends look like. So the last good data set that we have relates to 2015, and in 2015 it was estimated that only 68% of the global population, which is about 5 billion people, had at least a basic sanitation service. So that left 2.3 billion people who don't even have the most basic acceptable sanitation service at all. Now, that's a very big number, and we can get lost in the statistics, but what does this really mean for people's lives? So what does it mean if you don't have basic sanitation? Well, in practice, it could mean several things. So one is that people might have a very basic toilet, but it is so poorly constructed and of the wrong materials that it may be very unhygienic, which means that the facility is likely to transmit disease. It's possible that they might have a toilet, but that they share it with other households or other members of the community. So in general, when we're talking about basic sanitation or improved sanitation, we're talking about a toilet in the home. So that's a basic requirement that everybody should have around the world, is a hygienic toilet in the home that they don't have to share with anybody else. And currently 2.3 billion people don't have that. I guess the worst case scenario that for those of us who are used to having a hygienic toilet might have to put up with is not having a toilet at all. So in the sanitation world, we call this, we tend to use the word open defecation. So this is a situation where people don't have a toilet and basically go to the toilet outside the house somewhere. So that might be going near the local watercourse or by the side of the road or in a wood or in an agricultural field, whatever is available. And unbelievably, the 2015 statistics account for 892 million people who openly defecate around the world at the moment. The last thing I wanted to say in this introduction is that when especially academics think about bad sanitation, we tend to associate it with the potential health impacts that bad sanitation might have. But of course, if you don't have a toilet in your home or a hygienic toilet in the home, there are all sorts of other impacts on your quality of life. So it may be a source of shame or a lack of pride and dignity that you have your own toilet. There are situations where people leaving the house to go to the toilet might be attacked in the street on their way to the public toilet. And of course, there are enormous economic and environmental impacts of bad sanitation as well. So there are lots of good reasons for trying to improve this situation.
Great. Thank you, Mariale and Sean, for this great introduction. So I think we can start discussing the first question about where we are now. What do you know from your experience about where we are now regarding circular sanitation in developing countries? What kind of innovations have you heard of? What is the situation now? Let's start with that. Do you want to start?
So I think the circular economy is a really nice way of thinking about something that the sanitation community have been thinking about for a while. So there was a movement called the Eco-San movement, which was about how can we capture particularly the nutrients available in human waste and use those for the production of food. And there's some very simple examples, like, for example, when you've finished, when your pit latrine is full, when it is full to the top, you can plant a tree on the top of it and use the nutrients in that pit to help that tree to grow. And this has bloomed into a new movement, and especially as the world has urbanized. So when you're thinking particularly about urban households, to extend on what Sean was saying, these are households that may not even have space, very much space for a toilet. So in those households, they can't just move a pit latrine once it's full. So in a rural area, you can simply move the latrine, move the superstructure, and leave the full pit. In an urban area, that's not possible because of the density of the housing. So people have been really thinking in a more advanced way about how do we get fertilizers from human waste. And there have been a number of studies, including ones that we've carried out here at Cranfield University, in how effective those fertilizers can be in improving crop yields. And I think that's a very positive step. Though I guess the one thing that surprised me as I've been doing this research with my students is how early we are on this journey. There are still very few examples, if any, worldwide of where fertilizer is being produced from human waste at scale and sold to commercially and in a commercially viable way. I think there's a lot of promise, but there's a lot of barriers to overcome. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity. There's many other opportunities for circular economy within sanitation, producing energy, for example, producing animal food. But these, I think, are even more embryonic. So I think there's a lot of research and there's a lot of brave entrepreneurs out there trying to make this work, but it's not a reality yet.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Paul, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. So just really adding to what Alison was saying, I think we can, at this point of thinking about sanitation and the circular economy, it is actually useful to reflect on the historical precedents around using human waste as a resource. And so lots of the thinking in our era now is trying to think about new technologies and new ways of doing things. But human waste has been used, particularly in agriculture, for millennia. We know that the nutrients within human waste and within sanitation waste flows are theoretically a valuable resource. And in London, before the development of modern sanitation systems, we had the night soil system where waste was collected by cart and taken out into the agricultural areas. So we know there is the potential for value to be extracted from waste streams. There's two other main ways that is done, and one of them is thinking about whether these waste streams can be used to produce energy through technologies such as anaerobic digestion. And there is already on UK water treatment plants and in many countries, particularly China, waste streams, both human waste but also agricultural waste, are used as source material in biogas production. So that's another way that sanitation can be used in this context. The final kind of main valuable resource within these waste streams is the actual water. We know that most sewage and most even concentrated human waste in pit latrines is actually water, and we know water is a precious resource. So theoretically, we have these potentials to use sanitation waste in these different ways to produce energy, to recover water, and to get nutrients. There's also some interesting new avenues where technology is advancing to cover off potentially the recovery of more precious and rare contaminants and things that are within these waste flows, so pharmaceutical products or even gold. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the kind of the final area where there is a more contemporary innovation is around whether waste can be a potential source of information and data, particularly in terms of epidemiology. Can we understand disease flows from looking at waste? And so I think there's this whole kind of new conception around whether waste can be a source of data, which is one of the most innovative aspects of this circular economy agenda.
Yeah. Well, can I just come back on I mean, I think Paul covered quite a lot of big issues there. A couple that struck me that are worthy of discussion are one is the value of the products that we produce and how great a value we can ascribe to them. So if you look back to the traditions of recycling plant nutrients from human waste, we've tended to try to add very little value, I think, to the actual products. So in the if you go back to night soil collection or to the original sewage farms in Victorian England, there's a very small amount of processing done to the human excreta before it goes to the land. So I guess the kind of the minimum public health acceptable step is to sanitize the human waste so that it's microbiologically safe to find its way to the fields. But if you're a farmer, when you're thinking about the choices that you would make in terms of productive agriculture, and if you're thinking about making products that people want to buy, you need to add value to them. The products need to be as good as the alternatives on the market, or even better, ideally. So that suggests a degree of added value processing and that's got to be one of the opportunities that are out there. I mean, if you look at some of the examples that Alison and Paul have referred to, for example, biogas production. So in biogas production, you could argue the principal product is the gas. So we recover the energy value, the calorific value that's inherently present in the waste. We turn it into a gas, and then we can use it for cooking or heating or power production. And then we have a byproduct, which is a digestate. So that's effectively the material that's had the energy taken out of it, but it's still got the plant nutrients in it. So we can directly use that digestate in the fields, or we can convert it into a compost, and that compost might be easy to transport or easier to store. But the plant nutrients might not be in the best possible form for the farmer to use. So if the farmer is being asked to spend $1 per kilo on this product versus a dollar's worth of artificial fertilizer, maybe they'll go for the artificial fertilizer because they know exactly what it's going to do when they put it in the field. So I think one of the issues for circular economy and for innovation is to think about what are the innovative processes that would allow us to make new things or better products that consumers would like to buy. And Alison's quite right. I mean, it's the figures for sewage sludge recycling in the UK. It's something like 75% of all the sewage sludge that we produce in this country goes to agricultural land, but the actual cost of the production of a safe sludge to go to land is not paid for by the consumer, the farmer. It's paid for by us as polluters, as producers of the waste material. So the utility pays the farmer almost to provide them with a product, and we'd like that to be the other way around. So I think innovative processing is a really interesting question. And I think can I just have one more thing that came out of what you were saying, Paul, was really about questioning the way the material gets from A to B. So in the conventional Western sewer-based system, if you think about flushing your toilet, the flush and forget idea, we go to the toilet, we flush it, the material leaves our house. We're normally pretty happy about that, and off it goes to the sewage treatment works down a pipe. So in effect, we have a centralized system, and if we're thinking about waste or value recovery, that needs to happen at the sewage treatment works. But does it have to be? Should that be the system? I said at the beginning, there's 2.3 billion people who don't have a good toilet. Is the future for them water flushed sewerage with all of the environmental negative impacts of nutrient pollution of watercourses associated with that, or is there another way? So are we dead set on our end goal being the sewer, or could we imagine a sewerless society where we do that in a different way? And could we process locally. So I guess it would be nice to talk about, are there different ways that waste can get from the house to a treatment point, or are there even, could you imagine treatment in the house? So you completely decentralize. So that would be a total paradigm shift if you were able to move away from the conventional sewer idea. So I'd be interested to hear. Yeah,
that doesn't just have to be for the 2.3 billion people without sanitation. That could be for all of us. So I think that could be for us in the UK in the future as well.
But is there any prospect? I mean, are there systems out there that don't rely on sewers?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think we have seen some technology developing that are decentralized for sanitation, and that's what I think actually the circular economic concept is so exciting, because it's kind of rethinking the way we do things.
Yeah.
And you could see already some technologies out there that are decentralized and actually are treating waste in there. So I remember like 10 years ago, I went to here in the Lake District, and there was like this hotel which had like bed sets, and they were like treating their waste through bed sets. So and it was a really nice way of bringing it back all their sewage into feeding their agricultural land through this technology. So I think there are already things there that we actually could decentralize and make it more localized to feed back into the natural system of that region, of that area. The thing here is also a question of aspiration, I think, especially in the developing world. So through the Melinda Gates Foundation, the research that Cranfield is doing, and Alison is quite involved, and you as well, Sean, on the toilet. One of the things, talking to my colleagues in C4D, one of the things that they were saying is that people really aspire a toilet, like a toilet with tiles and everything, as the way we see it. And sometimes I just think, like, I will never imagine that, but because they have seen that type of toilet as an aspirational thing, they would like to have that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of looking to how we see technology that actually meets the needs of people in the developing world.
Yeah.
So.
And that's why I think we need to get away from this idea of toilets, a flush toilet being the gold standard, and how can we encourage people to think about alternative systems and not see one as above the other as all kind of options on the table.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting about whether we need to keep doing what we have done in the past, or whether we should change. Maybe we need a paradigm shift and go from something new in those countries where they don't have any sanitation. We have the opportunity to start from zero and maybe develop new systems that will be sustainable and that we can reuse the waste that is being produced there. So have you seen any example during your sanitation or circular economy experience where you have seen something that it was completely different from what you have seen in the past? And I don't know. And also, how could you change people and also governments to invest in something new, different, and maybe at the beginning more expensive? Because here we are talking about basic sanitation for everyone, and sometimes that conflicts with more sophisticated treatment systems. I mean, how we can find the right balance between sanitation for all and perfect waste reuse?
Well, I think one of the interesting things to think about is the level of technology that's appropriate around the world. And I think to perhaps to oversimplify some ways of thinking, someone mentioned ecological sanitation earlier on. So ecological sanitation as a concept has embraced decentralization, and it's embraced nutrient reuse locally, and it's embraced low water use. And so the classic example of the ecological sanitation technology is a composting toilet. So the idea of a composting toilet is that your excreta is stored at the point of production. So you basically have your own excreta store, and that material is sanitized and processed locally to produce basically a fertilizer or a compost that could be used in agriculture. But of course, and that's a perfectly sound idea, and it's a low technology idea, but it's not necessarily suitable for the billions of people that live in cities around the world. So one can imagine that producing composts would work very well if you have a use for that compost. That if you live in a high-rise tower block in the middle of a very dense city, a composting toilet is very unlikely to be practical, and you're not going to have any use for the compost that you produce anyway. So that's not the answer. But there's an interesting question about could high technology solutions, very innovative technologies, be used in this kind of environment? And very often, I think people have thought that high technology solutions are not appropriate for the developing world because incomes are low, and we should be looking for technologies that are much simpler, maybe even things that people could build themselves out of locally available materials. But I think there are lots of examples of technology jumps in the developing world where developing economies and communities haven't gone through the same processes or through the same steps that we have in the developed world. So everyone talks about the mobile phone. I don't know if there is another better example, but the mobile phone is a perfect one. So in cities all across the world, people have gone from not having a landline, a conventional wired telephone, through to having a mobile, and that can work perfectly well. So why not think like that for sanitation technology? Do we have to go through the same process of aspiring towards a water flush toilet? Can we produce something that delivers all of the same benefits of a water flush toilet? So people want to flush and forget, send it away. They don't want to see their waste ever again once they've produced it. It has to look nice. It needs to look modern. It needs to have low odor. It needs to be hygienic. Those are things that people expect. And if you don't give them that, that's not what they want. You're giving them something inferior. So the question is can you do all of that with innovative technologies, but not connected to the sewer? Just wondered if it was worth saying something about the reinvented toilets as a concept.
Yeah, the reinvented toilets, there are several under development all over the world, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There are quite a lot of different teams working in different ways, and I think one of the challenges, because the challenge with that is to work completely off grid for water, energy, and sewerage, is trying to get something that is safe but also is meets in particularly that energy requirement. And I think that's quite challenging. So I think there are some promising examples there, but also I think there has been quite a focus on getting something that produces safe sanitation without maybe realizing some of the circular economy advantages.
There is a question here from someone in the audience about who should be part in the discussion about innovation and circular economy for sanitation. Should it be, well, policymakers, business that are able to treat that waste, or maybe also citizens? Because also some of the problems with the products from sanitation is that sometimes people are not comfortable using them. There is like some barriers about it. So who should be involved in this discussion, in your opinion?
I think it really does need to be a consortium of people. I don't think that technologists have the answer all on their own. I don't think policymakers have the answer all on their own. It really is a problem that needs to involve like so many people around the table. So all the people that you've suggested, municipalities, citizens, representatives of citizens groups, people who are very familiar with different technologies. All of those need to come around the table. And if we think we can solve this, if we think as academics we can solve this problem on our own, we're very naive.
And just to add to that, that a big component of overcoming inadequate sanitation in many places is related to behavioural change, related to the habits and behaviours people generated or lived by throughout most of their life, and maybe have practiced in that area for a long time. So there's many examples of even in cases where toilets, good working toilets with, say, septic tanks, are constructed, unless people actually want to use them and feel comfortable using them, then they have no value. I mean, we have to think of sanitation as more than just the technology. I think there's an interesting point about the circular economy, because previously we have thought about sanitation mainly through the prism of public health, and particularly around the idea that sanitation is a public good that the state, normally the state, should invest in for the collective benefit of the population. But we know in places where there is not adequate domestic resources, where the state system is not able to provide to that level, then we increasingly want the private sector, other innovators, to come in and try and bridge that gap. So I think increasingly in the more intractable elements of the sanitation challenge, we need new ideas, we need new innovation, new business models, and particularly in that space, it's through the coordination that we're going to get the creative solutions we need.
There's a question there about, does the public need to understand? And that is, I couldn't support that more if I tried. So having experts telling people what their toilet should be like is not the starting point. It should always start with the user. So we should be asking the users what they want, and then we meet their aspirations. That's point one. The second one is about there was a mention there about sanitation not being the sexiest subject. Yeah. And that we don't think that, obviously. But it is true that there is a natural disgust that the public feels and fears about reusing human waste. And I think hiding from that is not the way to deal with this. We need to, it's the same with the recovery of value from all types of waste materials, that we need to embrace it completely and be very open with the consumers and convert them. So I think we need to work much harder on explaining to people or understanding what people's fears are. So, for example, there is, in my opinion, as a microbiologist, there is an unnecessarily high fear about the public health risks associated with reused excreta products. We have the technology to make completely safe products that can be put to a wide range of uses in agriculture and in other areas. But we need to talk to the public and understand about the right ways of communicating that to them, to overcome their fears and to actually get them enthusiastic about the benefits of this aspect of the circular economy. It's absolutely essential that there is a closed loop between food production and waste production and returning our plant nutrients back to the soil. It's an absolute requirement for sustainable living. So we've got to get people to understand that that's what we're going to do with their waste, with their fecal waste. We're going to return it back to the soil and produce high quality products as a result.
But to link back to what Paul was saying about the behaviour change aspect, we rely on that natural disgust reaction to sanitation to encourage people who are currently open defecating to use a toilet, and then we change our message and say we need, actually it's not that disgusting, you can use it to produce food. And there is, it's actually quite a kind of strange leap that we're asking people to make. So I think that we do need to involve, as Sean says, the public a lot more to try and get them to really understand maybe some more of the science behind it, so that they can understand that open defecation is disgusting, but reuse of materials isn't, and that there is a scientific basis for both of those, but it's not, maybe not that obvious.
Maybe like Rafi was saying earlier today, we need to think about a nice way to sell this. So she was talking about vintage. So when you say something is vintage, it's like you're reusing something, right?
But sanitation.
But when it comes into
2013 waste was just so good.
So we need to nail a term that looks like vintage for waste and sanitation.
Yeah, well, that's sanitation marketing. That's what that is all about. It's it's trying to tap into people's desires and wants and aspirations and find the right terminology to say, here is a great product. So in some ways, you see, as a scientist, I like the idea of being able to make the scientific link and to make the scientific case to say this product is completely safe and it works really well and it's better than that product. But I guess a marketing person wouldn't necessarily look at it like that, and they'd say, well, we need to brand it in the right way so that people don't really even think about where it came from. They just think, wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, where can I get some?
Well, actually, one of the things I was mentioning here, and it's also in the toilet board report, is about the waste being a high content of protein, and I didn't know that. And I was just like, well, then suddenly I just started thinking when I was a kid, and I was like looking to my dog and eating his own poo. I was like, that's disgusting. But now I understand why they're doing that, right? It's just like, it's a really high content of protein, and actually that's quite exciting. And what to do that, like how to convert that to something that is valuable is quite exciting.
Well, Alison will know that in certain parts of the world, quite poor farmers feed their human waste to their pigs. So they build a toilet so that the waste basically falls into the pig pen, and then the pigs eat the human waste. Now, that is a way of converting human waste into animal protein that isn't safe. So we do need to find new processes that allow us to convert human waste into safe edible protein, but in a less risky way.
Some of the insect-based ways of doing that are really exciting. So I had a tour of a kind of pilot plant in Kenya where they were growing kind of insects on human waste and then harvesting those and selling them as animal feed, and it was really exciting. And I'm not an insect expert at all. Like I said, this sector needs so many different experts on different topics, but it was fascinating and promising, and I hope they can work out how to scale it up.
That sounds really good. Interesting.
Yeah.
Talking about new technologies, there is a question here about what are your thoughts on source separating toilets? I think you are probably the best people to talk about this because of your work with the nanomembrane toilets. But
source separating toilets, which as I would understand is a toilet which is designed so that when you sit on it, the urine and the feces are separated. So to be blunt about it, there's a urine collection part at the front and a feces collection part at the back. The critical thing is that everyone has to sit down, even men. And the argument for those is quite positive because actually when you look at how you would recover nutrients, it's much better if the urine and the feces are separate. So I think there's quite a strong argument for them. The arguments against them, however, are they are easy to misuse. So you get men who won't sit down, and I remember being shown some very compelling photos by a colleague in South Africa where there were two brown waste streams, and he says, which of these do you think is the urine and which is the feces? So they are very easy to misuse. So for that reason, on the toilet that we're developing here at Cranfield, the nanomembrane toilet, we haven't done source separation. So we take the urine and the feces together and separate them out as part of the process within the toilet, so that we can get, for example, water out, clean water out of the toilet. So we've made that decision, but I think if people can overcome some of the behaviour change aspects and get people really well using urine separating toilets, or source separating toilets, and I think they're very promising.
I mean, the question from Michael Paulin says, are there particular obstacles to their adoption other than inertia? And I think there's obviously the behavioural issue of your preparedness to use a source separating toilet, but as Alison said, I mean, you almost don't notice you're using them. So I don't think that's a particular problem, but there is a question of once you've source separated them, what happens to the stuff? So the whole point of separating the materials is that they can be collected separately and then processed and in the most using the most appropriate technology and then reused. So they tend to be used in conjunction with composting type toilets, where you're going to compost the fecal matter and you want to keep it dry because that helps the composting process, and then the urine can be taken away separately and is almost a ready to use fertilizer in itself. So I think source separating toilets make most sense when they're built into a complete sanitation service chain that has taken into account the value and the use of those end products.
Yeah.
So the actual source separating toilet part of it, I don't think is that much of a challenge. The bigger challenge is the whole sanitation system that they're put into.
For example, urine, as Sean says, is a kind of a ready to use fertilizer in some ways, but it's also very it's got a lot of water content, which makes it very heavy for its value. So when you're thinking about urine as a fertilizer, it needs to be used locally because it's just too expensive to transport it anywhere, which is fantastic if you do have a local use for it. But as Sean pointed out earlier, if you're in a tower block, then you may have no use for it at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the context is important as well to see what could work or not. Because if you are in a big city, probably the solution to sanitation and circular economy is going to be different than if you are somewhere in the middle of the mountains. So.
And also it's about like coming back to linking to circular economy and probably a little bit more, I mean, I would not like to say the technical cycle, but more about like the business model behind it. If you need to collect something, you need kind of to servitize that. So that is like including new business models into the equation. Yeah. And that's also another point that I think is quite exciting, because we're looking into also provide local jobs, increase skills as well. So all these kind of things kind of actually benefit the society as a whole.
Okay, so we have like 2 minutes left. So to finish this session, in your opinion, what would be the next step or next steps to make circular economy for sanitation a reality? What would be the priorities in a way?
I'll just say that we need to take source separating toilets. We need to design technologies and service systems not for best case scenario. They need to work in all contexts, for the ill, for the disabled, for people that don't have an enlightened view about using the sanitation system. So the challenge is we have the technology, it's making it everyday proof and linking it into workable systems.
I'm not really sure. I don't think there's one thing that we can do that would really make a difference. There are no silver bullets in sanitation. So I think there needs to be more research, there needs to be more entrepreneurs with fantastic ideas, there needs to be more advocacy with decision makers, municipalities, governments. There's a lot of different fronts that need to move forward. So I don't think I can propose one of them, I'm afraid.
I think I would stop making it a sanitation problem and think about it in a much bigger context. So if you wanted to look at the smart city agenda, if you were redesigning the city or designing a new city from scratch and you were not going to put sewers in, you could bring together a whole load of people. So yes, sanitation technologists, but also designers and architects and the people who are town planners, the people who are designing the layout of habitation, thinking about the links between the city and the rest of the catchment, and links to farming and industry. And if you were to do that as an innovative activity and say, right, we're going to start from a blank sheet of paper, how can we make this work? You wouldn't start off with the sanitation problem. You'd make all of these issues of transport and housing and waste disposal and recycling, new technology innovation. You bring all of these things together so that they all work together. And I think that's where the innovation needs to start. It's not at the individual problem level. It's the whole of sustainable living.
I will finish saying multidisciplinary collaboration. So, and that's kind of tapping into what
I agree.
Great.
So,
well, anything else to finish?
No.
That's all. Well, thank you very much all for your contributions.
Well, thank you very much, guys. That was a really interesting discussion. And thanks, Dolores, for guiding the discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariella, Sean, Alison, and Paul, for giving us the insights into the types of technological innovations, the transformations, and the societal attitude changes required to unlock the potential of closed-loop circular sanitation services. And I thought there was a really poignant point that actually Sean brought up right at the beginning, that 2.3 billion people don't have the most basic sanitation services available to them. And in the most purely human terms, that's a really staggering stat and kind of highlights the real urgency to effectively and safely close these human waste streams. But it's some really interesting and important things discussed here today. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you very much to all you at home that watched and posed your questions to the speakers. We have quite a few other sessions coming up that touch upon the subject of sanitation. But before I mention a few of them that are coming up in the DIF, I just wanted to let you know that you can still put your questions and comments on the session page. And I'm sure these guys will answer your questions if you post them. So on to a few sessions that may pick your fancy if you're interested in the circular economy or sanitation more generally. On the, if I just bear with me a moment, on the 16th of November at 2 p.m. UK time, there are a handful of speakers from industry that will be discussing the economics behind closing closing human organic waste loops. So look out for the session, Sanitation Economy, the Commercial Case and Economics for the Biological Cycle in the DIF schedule. That's the 16th of November at 2 p.m. UK time. And on the 20th of November at 4 p.m, we'll take a look at how new technologies can transform water reuse with PhD researcher Thomas Fudge. So if you missed this morning, we had our first session from Cranfield University, this being the second. That first session, Grill the Circular Geeks, is available and catch up if you missed it. And again, any live or pre-recorded content that you have missed from the DIF, you can go back and catch up whenever you have the time. So thanks again, Dolores, Mariella, Paul, Alison, and Sean for joining us at the DIF today. Until next time, it's goodbye.